On February 11, it'll be 2 years since Governor Scott Walker introduced Act 10, which dramatically limited the collective bargaining rights of public employees in Wisconsin. I've asked 3 public employee union leaders to come and kind of talk about that Act 10 2 years later. To my left, Marty Beil, Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Employees Union, Marty Beil, President of the Wisconsin State Education Association, and Bryan Kennedy, President of the American Federation of Teachers of Wisconsin. Thanks so much for coming back. We last talked on this subject, I think it was in 2011. Let me ask an overview question. Act 10, what has it done to public employees in Wisconsin? Marty, you want to go first, sir?
Sure. From the perspective of state employees, it's had incredible impacts on the state workforce. And on state employees. The economic impact on state employees has been absolutely incredible. I mean, a day doesn't go by where we don't hear a member of ours talk about that they are currently now eligible for whether it's food stamps or badge care or whatever, and the cost of their benefits are being driven up to the point they're being driven off of benefits, which is unheard of in the public sector. So there's a huge economic impact on state workers, and I think on public workers in general. But there's also this impact at their work sites, and the fact of the matter is that they have no ownership in what occurs in their work site. Good public policy and HR processes talk about having, kind of a work site that has a give and a take and a communications. For the most part, that doesn't exist. And I'm not talking about one agency. I'm talking across agencies. And so, workers feel devalued, and morale is low. And I'm sure that with the onset of the budget proposal, we may see more retirements coming out, and that's unfortunate. We're losing a lot of resource, and we're losing a lot of assets out of state government.
Marty, thanks very much. Mary, your perspective from WEAG?
Very similar in some respects to what Marty described. We've seen record retirements. People's morale is low in many places because that feeling that they had that it was a collaborative enterprise, that they worked with administration and school boards to serve children and communities, in so many places has been destroyed, that it really was an illusion that collective bargaining and collective voice gave them. But it is redoing and rethinking how they operate in that workplace that gives me hope that we can get past that. But it is, in many places, the resources to school districts have not allowed them to continue programs. The logic of a collective bargaining agreement that talked about how employment decisions would be made, that security is gone. So there are just a lot of unknowns, and in many places it's a sense of chaos, that they don't know what the new order is, even after 2 years.
Thank you very much. And Bryan, AFT perspective?
I think the biggest loss with the loss of most of our rights for collective bargaining is really the deprofessionalization of public education and of public services. Both Mary's organization nationally and mine, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, initially started as professional organizations. We were about best practice. We were about what are the best norms for teaching and how do we implement those across the board. Collective bargaining in the 20th century then became a tool for that. We would negotiate best practices, professional development, teacher work days with workshops instead of having the students in the classroom those days. All those things were things we negotiated into a contract, and they help make public education better. It's one of the reasons Wisconsin has some of the best public schools you'll find anywhere in the country. And now we have administrators who maybe spend a year or two in the classroom, if they were ever in the classroom at all, or elected school board members who may not really know much about pedagogy or instruction or public education, other than they want to look at the public purse and make sure to rein in the taxes. Mm-hmm. And so you have a lot of them now calling the shots and dictating what is best practice in the classroom. And teachers, the professionals, the ones who, this is what they study, this is what they do, no longer having a voice in that process and being able to help determine those best practices and policies in their school
Let me
districts.
ask a quick follow-up. You talked about the impact on public employees. Can I ask you each, what about the impact on public services? Marty, your thoughts?
Sure.
Less public services?
I think there's a question about quality public services and access, and in some ways less public services. I'll give you an example right
Please.
up front. King Veterans Home in Wapaka. King Veterans Home has been there 100 years. It was a well-respected facility for our heroes and their families. And when Act 10 went into place and those workers lost collective bargaining, you could see a direct correlation between the quality of care and the fact that their collective bargaining agreements were gone, to the point now that to use one of Mary's terms, it's chaos at that veterans home because of the incredible amounts of vacancies and people who are managing the place that don't know how to schedule people, and so the quality of care of those vets suffer from that. And that's just one example out of many, many examples where the quality of services diminishes as morale diminishes and as people retire and go on and the positions aren't filled. That has a dramatic impact on the public services.
What about classrooms, Mary?
Well, Marty talked about the numbers of people that are retiring, the years of experience and the quality educators that have really felt pushed out of the classrooms across the state has, I think, affected that. But more than that, we've seen schools of education lose people who want to become future teachers. So who's going to be in those classrooms if the job has become so deprofessionalized or demoralized that no one wants to coach their son or daughter to be a teacher anymore because it's not a profession that has the kind of honor that really ought to be attached to what those people did. But furthermore, what happened 2 years ago under the guise of we can't afford to keep collective bargaining, that has proven not to be what happened, because regardless of what school districts gained by trashing the collective bargaining relationships they had with their employees, district after district across this state is going to referendum because they cannot operate under this budget. They have cut programs, they have cut staff, they have reduced the kind of quality preparation that Brian referenced earlier. They've cut professional development. Those have an impact directly on our kids and on the quality of the product that Wisconsin schools are known for.
Thank you. Brian, cuts in services?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't really have anything additional to add.
Okay.
No, I think
Yeah, but I do.
Please, Marty.
Prior to Act 10, public workers, whether they were teachers or whether they cleaned the Capitol or whatever, they wore the fact that they were a public employee. They wore it like a badge of honor. Okay, I mean, the public sector. People don't work in the public sector to get rich. I mean, you don't find Mitt Romney's coming out of the public sector. Okay, but they do it because of a dedication to public services. And what Act 10 did is it took away that pride, and then all of the discussion and all of the right-wing rhetoric about teachers or about public workers really sent a message to these workers in the public service about, is it all worth it? Maybe I should go to the factory and earn a little bit more money and have a job that people aren't banging me in the press every day. So there's been that whole sea change of attitude, and people don't necessarily wear the fact that they're a public employee on their chest anymore. They don't talk about it because they've been harassed about it and they've been, trivialized, and it's been a horrible kind of environment to be a public worker.
While we're talking about a statewide view, let me ask you about some numbers that were in the New York Times, just to ask you whether you think they're valid. The New York Times reported in 2011, 187,000 unionized public employees in Wisconsin. In 2012, 139, a drop of 48,000, or a drop of 25%. Can I just ask you, do you think there has been a drop of 1 in 4 public employees who are union members between 2011 and 2012? Does that sound right, Mary?
Well, it's reflective of what we're seeing, but you need to know it's not just Act 10 by itself. Act 10 plus record numbers of positions that are no longer available because districts were not replacing people. It's a restriction in who is actually eligible for union membership in a lot of public workplaces. It was taking away bargaining rights from some of the folks who had just gained them in Bryan's union. And overall, you were looking at people who were given a choice. Take a huge pay cut and stay a union member, and those people who decided they would recoup some of their loss by not joining, I'll tell you, I'm very pleased that we're getting 25% only with the kind of cuts that our members had to take.
Bryan, thank you, Mary. Faculty members at some of our UW systems had just won the right to collectively bargain.
We had 8 collective bargaining elections. Yeah.
And 8 collective bargaining elections covering how many employees, sir?
Oh, I'd have to add up all the several thousand.
Several thousand.
Right, faculty and academic staff across the system. Yeah.
And Act 10 took away their right to collectively bargain.
That's correct.
So that's picked up by the 25% number.
Except that we are actually up 175% in our faculty and academic staff membership, and we've chartered 4 new locals in the university system. So the one population where there isn't a decline are among the faculty and academic staff who have essentially said, Walker may have taken away my right to bargain a contract, but he is not taking away my right to be a member of a union, and the union membership is actually up among faculty and academic staff.
Well, let's turn the corner and ask.
There is hope.
There is hope.
Well, yeah. Let's explore that. So, just your union, Bryan, AFT. Do you have more members now than you did the last time we gathered in 2011?
We have more members in higher education.
In higher education.
But
what about overall?
We are down in state employment.
Any numbers you can release?
No, I don't have the latest figures, and from today anyway. So
okay,
I do get regular reports, but I haven't looked at them since I think right before the holidays was the last time I had a briefing. So
then, Mary, WEAC membership statewide,
pretty reflective of the 25% loss that you talked about earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, we're over 70,000.
Okay, and then Marty, you've had a very interesting situation. The last time you were here on the panel, you represented how many state employees, sir?
Prior to Act 10, we represented about between 18 and 20,000.
18 and 20,000. What's the number now?
About 8,000.
About 8,000. So you've lost 10. Wow. But I find it intriguing. There is an attempt now. Well, first of all, explain to me. Council 24 chose not to, what's the proper term so I don't get it wrong?
Chose not to certify the 6 units that we have. We have 7 units, 1's certified, 6 are not certified.
Okay, and you made that decision. Why, sir?
We made that decision because of the new rules under Act 10. We made a very conscious decision that we would devote our resources to advocating for state workers rather than every year go through an election in a unit of 5 or 6 or 7,000 people.
Okay.
Because all we would be doing is organizing to an election. If you got 5,000 people, we would do nothing else during the year. So we chose not to certify in 6 of the 7 units.
And Marty, if your union's like mine, those 5,000 or 6,000 are spread across hundreds of work sites across the state. Yeah, making it very, very difficult.
Did many of your members just say, look, since we have to pay more for health care and pensions, I'm sorry, I love the union, but I'm going to take what I'd been paying in dues and use it to offset my higher pension and health care contribution?
Sure, lots of them did, and we saw it again here when the increase in the payroll taxes went into effect here a couple of weeks ago.
2% bump from 4.2%.
We saw again people saying, I really would like to belong, but I'm to the point now where I have to make incredible decisions about, my house, my kids, and my family. Walker created a perfect storm, and as he implemented right to work on public sector workers, he basically put a system together where he was pinching the unions, if you will, or other organizations kind of out of the picture by every on a regular basis, increasing the amount of money people paid on their pension or their health insurance or whatever. And so it was eye-opening for me 6 or 8 months after Act 10 was implemented, when I'd go to local union meetings and people would come and tell me how that they just lost their home. These were state workers. You never heard that story. with state workers. And we don't represent the wealthiest people. I think our average wage across our units is about $13 an hour. It's not a lot of money for a family of 4. But people had a security and some economic security and dignity prior to Act 10. After Act 10, their life was in chaos.
Well, just to stay with Marty a little bit, help me understand why a group of correctional officers want to form the Wisconsin Association of Correctional Law Enforcement with more than 5,800 members. So they don't want to be members of your union?
There's some of them that
talk
don't.
To me about the process.
Sure, there are some that are trying to form their own union. Unfortunately, the leadership of these are folks who lost their elections and council elections, and have other personal issues, and so it's kind of like a kid taking his toy and going home. That's unfortunate. I think that's a very risky kind of situation, especially with this governor and this legislature, to divide, especially correctional workers. And you probably saw part of the testimony last week from the Assembly Corrections Committee, where the Secretary of Corrections is into intimidation of people, and so to have that kind of schism going on isn't good for those workers and those.
Well, I've been in the Capitol so long that I remember the day when I heard that you and former Corrections Secretary Litcher, you'd get together for breakfast, right?
Sure.
No longer happens, right?
I haven't. The new secretary refuses to meet with me.
I understand. Mary, how many decertification elections did your union survive?
I'm sorry.
Or is that the wrong way to ask the question? I can ask somebody else while you recover, but just did you win more than you lose, or win them all?
We didn't win them all.
Okay.
We won most of them.
Okay. Then what do you expect as union leaders to be recommended? The governor's going to come out with his 2013-2015 budget on February 20th. Do you look for new attacks on public employees in unions like yours, Brian?
Well, I look for further attacks on public services in general. I mean, this governor has already cut the funding significantly to our technical colleges, to the very institutions that retrain workers who've lost their jobs in one field to help them move to a different occupation. So he's already cut there. He's made significant cuts to public education. And and I know, looking at my own school district, the tools that Walker gave in allowing school districts to be able to take more from the employees' paychecks to pay for benefits were not enough to cover the shortfall. We had a referendum we had to pass in my local school district in order to be able to restore the funding that was lost from the last budget cycle. We're expecting, I think, similar sorts of cuts. Across the board, he has shown a real disdain for public services. He doesn't want government to function well. He just wants to be able to claim that he's giving people more of their tax money back. But we're willing to pay for. We've known in this state we have long been willing to pay for good services. And it makes it very hard to justify paying for services that are now essentially Walmartized by this governor.
Mary, Governor Walker has said, I have 5 priorities in my next budget. And the first thing he says? Education.
Yeah, private education.
Okay. Is that the biggest thing you fear in the next?
I pay attention to where the governor goes and what it is that he talks about. Unlike Act 10, which he didn't talk about until he actually launched the bill in the form that it's in, at least not in public forums. He is seen with school choice and voucher advocates. He believes in non-instrumentality charters, so that those education institutions that are not accountable to taxpayers are the place that he seems to want to put the new public money. This legislature actually has a surplus to work with. It's projected, it's really clear they're going to have money in this budget, and every indication from the governor is that he's going to direct that to public money going to private kinds of schools, and I don't believe that's what the citizens want.
But when Wisconsin and I did the Civil Dialogue show last month with Democratic Representative Barca and Speaker Voss, Voss said there will be more money in the governor's budget for public schools. You don't believe that?
I certainly hope that's true, but they are overcoming the greatest cuts to public schools in Wisconsin since the Great Depression. This is not the time to fund a non-taxpayer accountable private set of schools. Our schools in Wisconsin, as Brian and I have both talked about, have had to make very deep and very harmful cuts to the programs we offer children. Our technical colleges and our universities are struggling, and there's loss, not just in PK-12 institutions, but in those technical colleges and in our universities, of really quality people who want to educate the citizens of this state, both adults as well as children, who are finding it impossible to do that task, and they're going other places.
And just one more quick follow-up. Thanks for your patience, Marty. The governor has also indicated that he may recommend a bonus K-12 payments for schools who do the based on their performance. Your response?
I'm sorry, I thought you were directing it to Marty.
No. Marty's patiently waiting.
Okay.
If the governor recommends a fund of additional state aid for schools based on their performance, in other words, they achieve their test scores, sound anything that we could like?
I need to know on what basis he's making those judgments.
I understand.
That's always the key.
And I'm sorry for the confusion. You've been very patient. What do you look for in the governor's budget, sir?
I think we have to be very vigilant about the governor's budget. You know, and Mary's right. You know, we try to connect the dots, you know, long before the budget. But you know, just two things that just have cropped up over the last few days. He wants to take $200 million out of the state investment fund and give it to an agency who can't keep track of $56 million. How's that good for the citizens of the state?
Economic
Yeah, he
Development?
wants to give $200 million out of our pension fund to WEDC, who can't even keep track of money. And the other thing, you know, and I think it goes right to the spirit of what Scott Walker's into, this whole thing about contracting out the power plants, the state power plants, was in the last budget, kind of got played around with.
And they got dropped.
No bid contracts for, well, do you know, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the capital budget actually has appropriated money to upgrade every one of those state power plants, okay, so that they all meet EPA requirements. And then it was like Friday, the governor said, we're going to do this no bid contract for state power plants. So these utility companies will get these power plants that we as citizens have upgraded to meet EPA requirements on a no bid contract. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think we're going to see privatization of public services, and we're going to see a continued assault on the assets of the citizens of the state.
When you say privatization of public services, do you believe the governor's going to recommend privatization of prisons, sir?
Hey, all I can do is follow the dots. Okay.
Brian, you were going to make a point on the budget coming. Do you remember what it was?
Well, it is fine. Go ahead. I'll bring it up when we talk. Go ahead with your next question.
Okay. Do you think that as public employee union leaders, have you and your unions hit bottom? Is the pendulum swinging back for you and your members and the services they provide? You've had a difficult 2 years. Where are you in the court of public opinion? Mary, your thoughts?
In the court of public opinion, I think that union members are on the upswing because I think people are understanding what's being lost. I don't think we've hit the bottom in terms of the funding for schools. I don't think in terms of positions lost where we've hit it yet, but I am extremely hopeful with the kind of community conversations that we're having about the value that schools provide, about the value that public workers provide. I think those have a huge potential, both for the morale of our members as people realize that who they are, they're their neighbors, they're their friends, they're their family. That has a huge potential to change that conversation. I think that if we shine the light, as we do when the budget comes out, on the specific proposals that take away those things that Wisconsin citizens have built over time and try to shift those to private organizations, I think the communities across this state are going to respond.
And Brian, you were talking about some signs that make you hopeful with these some of these votes that you were referring to.
With the fact that we've seen increases in membership among higher education. That's a new area that was just in the process of being unionized at the time that Act 10 hit, and the fact that we've actually seen membership go up significantly in those areas, that the AFT has chartered new locals. I think that's a very very positive sign that as we reach out to people that have not had the benefit of being a part of a union before, and I think that's whether it's public sector or private sector, as we're moving into new areas, one of the things we are seeing is people embracing unionism, and once again we're seeing the tide of public opinion change, and more people saying, I think I'd like to be a part of a union.
Marty, you had a difficult 2 years, sir.
Well, I guess we all have a difficult 2 years. I mean, I think workers in general have a difficult 2 years. And, I think that as unions come back, they'll be different. They'll look differently than the unions of old. And, I got to follow up on Mary's comment. This community coalition building and having a community discussion about public services, whether it's education or corrections or King Veterans Home or whatever it might be, all of us spend a tremendous amount of time, and our members spend a tremendous amount of time involved in these community coalition building, community coalitions and community discussions. And I think that's the future. The future is that we can't do this alone. We can't defend the public service or public education alone, but we need the citizens of the state also to become part of our fight to make sure there's some integrity, to make sure there's well funding, and to make sure that our future is well protected. And I think Act 10 taught us that lesson.
And it's not just numbers that make me hopeful. It's the individuals that have stepped forward from my membership, people who have never identified themselves as a union member, but who are articulate and they are passionate about what they do, and they are now as passionate about the survival and the thriving of unions as their voice in the workplace. That's an amazing change that's really hopeful.
How do you frame the political debate looking out to the governor's re-election in November of 2014 and an election that will also determine whether the Republicans keep control of both the Senate and the Assembly? And I ask in the context of, let me ask you bluntly, did your unions frame the debate wrong in the pre-recall? Because the governor got more votes in the recall than he got in 2010.
What we were supposed to do, roll over?
Well, how do you frame the political debate, Marty, is the question.
I think we frame the political debate as the future of Wisconsin.
Right.
And you have to make a decision here about what you want for the future of the state. I mean, we need to continue to fight. We need to continue to educate. We need to continue to build coalitions. We need to continue to move forward. If we don't, what's the alternative? I mean, what's the alternative if all unions were out of the picture? I mean, the Republicans would run rampant over people. So no, I mean, do we think that we're going to be 100% successful in 2014? No. But that doesn't stop us from fighting. That doesn't stop us from having a public discussion about the issues. So, I mean, the alternative, the alternative is that we'd roll over. We're not going to roll over.
You both sound like you've got, you all sound like you've got a pretty, you believe you have a pretty effective political message going into 2014. Brian, you were about to say?
Yeah, well, this kind of comes back to comments I was going to make a couple different times here. Our public services were not built by the unions. They were built by people who wanted to make Wisconsin a better place. Workforce development is there to train the next generation workforce. Our technical colleges and our universities are there to train people to become better thinkers or to develop skills or talents that will bear fruit in the workplace. Our public schools are there so that all of our citizens would benefit from literacy and just not just in reading and math, but across the board to build educated citizenry. And those weren't built by the unions. Those were built by people who wanted to make this state a better place to live. What we're seeing right now is those in power trying to dismantle all of those things that have made Wisconsin a wonderful place to raise a family. And the unions are some of the only ones, the public sector unions, some of the only ones still out there advocating for public services, for protecting what it makes Wisconsin great. And so going back to their comments about community building, it's starting to engage more now with our communities and recognizing there's a lot of other people who feel that the public schools or the public services or the state agencies need to be maintained, need to be fully financed, need to be able to provide all the programming that they have in the past, that I think bodes well moving into the future for future elections, that we will help to put into office people who share the values that are Wisconsin values and not Koch brothers and corporate American values that don't necessarily reflect what is our progressive tradition in this
And then,
state.
Mary Weak's political message between now and November 2014?
Political message. I don't know. I was thinking about the whole community piece, but I believe it is a reinvestment in what we have traditionally had for public services. What I was thinking of is that my great-grandparents, within 5 years of coming to this country, formed a school so that their children would have a place to go to get the education that they weren't entitled to in Ireland, where they came from. As important as education is there, it wasn't a right for poor children. That is a bedrock of what Wisconsin's economic health was built on, and I think our communities understand that in a way that is going to cause those community conversations to bloom. I think that it isn't necessarily a 2-year kind of conversation, and the way that the redistricting maps have been built, I think that regaining the legislature anytime in the next decade is a very difficult lift, but it's one that communities, one at a time, are going to come to. But a statewide election is another thing. And recalls and general elections are not the same. And we have learned that time and time again in the last 2 years.
Final question, and then we're out of time. How much help is it to you and your members that President Obama got reelected? Brian?
Well, I think obviously our members strongly supported President Obama and Tammy Baldwin for U.S. Senate here in the state. I think it's a very positive sign. I mean, we actually saw Democrats, even if you add up Assembly and State Senate, we saw Democrats get hundreds of thousands more votes than Republicans, but the Republicans have gerrymandered the map in such a way that they control the legislature. The same thing happened even with the congressional seats. I mean, we saw a state that voted blue, even though they had just several months earlier, voted to retain the governor. I think, moving forward for my members, trying to engage and develop relationships with the new members of the legislature is a challenge, but it's one that, they're certainly willing to do. We recognize that Wisconsin's tradition was built by Democrats and Republicans working together. It was not built by one party or the other, and we need to get back to that. And so our members are engaging with their Republican legislators if they live in a Republican district, and trying to develop a relationship so that they can recognize and understand the importance of the public services that we provide.
How big a lift, Obama's reelection, Mary?
A lift? I don't think it was a lift. I think that people heard the message pretty clearly.
Okay.
And issues that resonate here in Wisconsin, be they immigration reform, be they avoiding the fiscal cliff in a way that allows us to both be responsible to taxpayers and address the need for federal services, those were messages that resonated here in Wisconsin. They got that. They'd seen how people do it in the other way, and they didn't like that. I also think that when it comes to those community conversations, we don't just invite in people that agree with us. We don't just invite one political party or the other. The whole point of a community is everyone is part of that conversation. And that's what both Brian and Marty and I have been talking about.
P.S. on Obama's reelection, sir?
I think it was a win. We hadn't had a win in a long time in terms of the political world. But it was, this may sound somewhat crass, or, I think my members were buoyed by the fact that Barack Obama is one of them. If you look, you listen, you watch him, he's just one of us. And that clearly wasn't the case with the Republican candidate. And so people felt kind of a partnership there. But I think the most important thing is it was a win. We hadn't had a win in a long time.
Well, thanks very much. This is an important dialogue. I'm going to ask you, after we see the details and the fine print on the governor's budget, could we reassemble maybe in 2 or 3 months? Is that
Sure.
okay?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Marty Beil, Mary Beil, Bryan Kennedy, birthday boy Bryan Kennedy, thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.